WPLG 715, Fireman Kenny's on the air, helping you to stay safe in a world where danger never takes a vacation. The International Code Council has declared May as Building Safety Month. On this episode, we talk with members of the Wisconsin State Fire Inspectors Association about the importance of building and fire codes, as well as fire prevention inspections. Welcome back to another installment of the Fireman Kenny Show podcast. Be sure to like, follow, and subscribe to the Fireman Kenny Show on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or whatever platform you're listening to the show. The International Code Council has declared May as Building Safety Month. On this episode, we talk with some past and present Wisconsin State Fire Inspectors Association board members, including Eau Claire Fire Department Fire Inspector Jason Knecht, Stevens Point Fire Department Fire Marshal Justin Malin, and Wauwatosa Fire Department Fire Marshal Dan Schmocker about the importance of building codes and fire prevention codes to help reduce injuries, deaths, and property damage. Before we begin the podcast, we would like to mention our sponsors. For over a century, the National Fire Sprinkler Association has been advocating for a stronger industry and a safer world by promoting fire sprinklers in model codes and legislation. Their mission is simple: to protect lives and property from fire through the widespread acceptance of the fire sprinkler concept. Be sure to follow the National Fire Sprinkler Association on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. You can visit the National Fire Sprinkler Association website, www.nfsa.org. We would also like to thank our friends at Fire Suppression Solutions, distributor of fire suppression products for the fire service and for home use. You can follow Fire Suppression Solutions on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and YouTube. Now a word from Fire Suppression Solutions.
Fire can strike without warning, leaving you with precious little time to react. And if you are not prepared, the damage can be devastating to life and property. In the blink of an eye, your home or business could be on fire, with flames doubling in size every 30 seconds, leaving you helpless and unable to respond. Don't let this nightmare become a reality. That starts with being prepared. Our fire suppression products are designed to equip you with an effective response to any fire emergency, all while limiting additional damage, making you the true first responder, giving you the peace of mind that you have what you need to keep your loved ones and property safe until more help comes. Do you have a plan to respond to a fire emergency at your home or business? Protect your family, pets, and property with the tools from Fire Suppression Solutions. Contact us today and finish putting your plan into effect before it's too late.
For more information on Fire Suppression Solutions products, you can visit firess.us. Welcome back to all 13 of our loyal listeners to another episode of the Fireman Kenny Show podcast. The International Code Council has declared May as Building Safety Month. With us on this episode are Jason Knecht, Justin Malin, and Dan Schmocker, who are all past and present board members with the Wisconsin State Fire Inspectors Association. Jason, Justin, and Dan, welcome to the show.
Hi, Kenny. Thanks for having me. My name is Jason Knecht, Fire Inspector with the Eau Claire Fire Department and President of the Wisconsin State Fire Inspectors Association, formerly of the Altoona Fire Department as well. I'm currently on a volunteer department around the city of Eau Claire called the Township Fire Department as the Captain of Training and Safety.
Hey, Kenny. Thanks for having me on. My name is Justin, Deputy Fire Marshal with Stevens Point Fire. I'm also the Emergency Management Coordinator, and I work part-time for Oregon Fire as well. Thanks for having me.
Hi, Kenny. It's a pleasure to be here today. Thank you for having me. I'm Dan Schmocker from the City of Wauwatosa Fire Department. I'm a Fire Marshal currently.
So since May is Building Safety Month and we have to take on a number of issues dealing with building safety, let's start with the codes and the importance of codes, whether it be state statutes, municipal codes, or the model codes such as the International Code Council's building codes or NFPA codes. Why don't we talk about the importance of codes?
You have to have some sort of basic safety in every building, whether it's state codes or municipal codes or the model codes that are out there. I think a combination of all three of those are ideal because of the occupant safety. You have to have occupant safety, and that's the whole goal, is to make these buildings safe and as safe as we can with fire suppression systems, with fire detection systems, and everything else we can make it safe for the occupants.
Jason, I just want to kind of echo you on that as well. I think it's pretty key, pretty important. You look at history and some of the high hazard, occupancies that have been out there and some of the incidents, that have happened and the loss of life or property. So again, it's just, reiterating that importance for those types of occupancies to have, the codes and we can follow. And there's a lot of different code sets that we are able to follow, make those buildings safe.
Yes, I would agree with all that said, but just one thing I would like to reinforce and let everyone remember the codes are a minimum safety standard. That's the absolute minimum safety guidelines, or how the building is constructed or designed or built, how the life safety components are designed or tie into the building construction. It doesn't say that you can't exceed the minimum standards, which I strongly encourage in most situations, but it sets a guideline for us to try and design and build a safe building.
Yeah, basically I've heard some other people say, code is the minimum requirement. It's kind of like a D-. That's the very bare minimum, which I think we obviously we always strive for more than that, but yeah, like you said, that's the bare minimum for safety.
I was more of a C student myself, and I
Yeah.
think that the new standard is a C. I think D- is now failing.
Well, the A students teach and the B students do work for the C students.
That's
So,
true.
yeah.
That's true.
Yeah.
Just had to throw that out there.
Well, let's talk about some of the model codes, and let's talk about, like, recently, I believe it was Indiana that had tossed out a lot of their codes, where they're now going to have codes that are going to be voted on by the legislature. What kind of dangers do we have if we're not using model codes that are developed by experts in the field, and we're dealing with legislators that are now going to have to vote on every code?
Boy, that's going to be a really big, tough issue. I think that's going down the wrong path. Number one, it's going to tie up the legislators' schedules, because all these new code votes are going to take up things and time that they really should be focusing on. That's why you have a model code for uniformity. And like what Wisconsin does is we pick a model code, and then in places where Wisconsin doesn't always agree with that model code, then they make their own. Or they exempt, make little special exemptions, what we call the Wisconsinisms. I think that's the way to go. I don't think the legislator should be involved at all, because now you're involving politics, and when you involve politics, it's the party or the people that pay the most get their way, or at least try. I think that's not the right way of doing things.
I agree, and I think doing it that way is going to put more people at risk when it comes to those building projects and some of the safety codes there.
What bothers me when you get politics or the legislators involved is the code process is so slow. If something comes to the main front where a code should be modified or changed or adopted due to a circumstance or maybe an incident that occurred, it takes forever to change or update codes.
Well, and that's because they allow all the stakeholders to have a say, and it's on a voting process like that. If you involve politics, I think that's very bad, because now, depending on what party you stand with and what your views are, that's what they're going to push. But then that will change every 2 to 4 years, depending on who gets in there.
And I also think too, to your point, the codes could change. A code might be passed, and then several years later, it could be reversed or turned over. And then just from an enforcement or tracking standpoint, it's already difficult now with how everything is. That'll just make it even more difficult.
So one of the other issues, and I can't remember which state it is, I want to say Ohio, but I can't remember. Let's talk about the issue of where if you make a new law, you have to get rid of 2 laws. So let's say, as an example, for Wisconsin using the 2012 edition of NFPA 1, we want to go to the 2024 edition. So that's a change to the law, but so that'd be one law that's gone, the 2012 edition, but you'd also have to throw out another law when all you want to do is update the edition of the current model code. So let's talk about the dangers with that.
where do we start with the dangers there? I think we're going to lose consistency. Again, from a knowledge standpoint, I think it's going to be very difficult. You got anything to...
Yeah, that just amazes me. Something like that could happen. That's like tit for tat. Or like one of my favorite cartoons, Calvin and Hobbes. That's like playing Calvin ball. If you don't get your way, I'm taking my ball and I'm going home.
What's scary to me about that concept is a lot of your codes that are in existence today were based on a foundation from the codes from years ago. So you may compromise or you may jeopardize some of the code foundation if you have to remove some of the code language from earlier years or earlier versions of the code that actually support what's being enforced in a newer version.
Code, a lot of these codes were invented because something happened. When codes are created, they're more reactive than proactive.
Yeah.
Going way back to the 1500s, some of the first fire codes were like no thatched roofs, and you can't have fires after so long a time or a certain time at night. And all of that is reactive. And now if you take away those codes, that foundation, like you said, Dan, now you're forgetting your history. That's why we have things like the Station Nightclub fire happen and the Coconut Grove fire and all of these things that have created all these fire codes. Now, if you get rid of that, now you're just going to be repeating history over and over and over again.
So one of the other issues that comes to codes and comes to safety that has been rearing its ugly head lately is the single stairwell issue. So there's builders that want to get rid of multiple stairwells in buildings up to 6 stories and be allowed to only put in one stairwell. And Sean DeCrane from the IAFF and Greg Rogers from the IAFC wrote a really great article against the single stairwell proposal. So let's talk about the dangers of the single stairwells.
I disagree with the proposal for single stair in multifamily construction. However, I do understand what the building industry is after. But from a safety standpoint, the risk versus the cost outweigh the benefits of the single stair in its entirety. People have to understand that in a fire situation, when the occupants of the building are trying to evacuate, we have the fire service with their equipment trying to enter the building and mitigate the issue. So number one, that is a huge, huge problem if we only have one stair. Typically with 2 stairs, we can designate or use one stair for firefighting or fire suppression activities, while the other stair can be used for evacuation.
Yeah, I agree with Dan that the concept, I understand. As a building developer and a building owner, you want to maximize your space that you have. I get it. However, again, we have to think of the safety of the occupants. Like Dan said, if we have multiple stairways, you can't use the elevator because in a fire situation, the elevator's out of service. So that means you have to use the stairs. And if you have multiple stairways, what if one stairway gets blocked? Well, you can use the other one. Or if people are coming down, the firefighters are going up. In one stairwell, we're meeting on that stairwell. And there's all kinds of operational issues with the fire service. People are going to be tripping over hoses and our equipment, banging into firefighters. People with mobility issues, that's going to be another problem. It's just a bad idea overall that creates more problems than it actually solves.
Yeah, agreed. Not to go repeat everything you both said, but tactically or operationally from the fire service side, there's not much of a benefit there. And then obviously from a safety standpoint, there's no benefit there. Obviously from a builder trying to maximize their space, yeah, there could be some benefit there, but not at the expense of safety or tactically from a fire response.
And, the whole concept of a stairway, it has to be positively pressurized to keep the smoke out of the stairway. Well, if there's one stairway, everybody's using that stairway. So now you're putting all your eggs in one basket. That with the people going in and out of that stairway, that reduces that air pressure. But then another scenario could be what if that stairway's blocked by fire or smoke? Now what? Now how do you fix that? If you lose the stairwell, you lose your way out.
Well, especially when it comes to people that are disabled, because they're able to get up by the elevator, but then it takes firefighters to take them down, going up the same stairwell that there might be hose lines in the stairwell or open doors that are not allowing for protecting of the flow paths when it comes to firefighting operations.
Yeah, the whole idea of that stairway being pressurized is it keeps the smoke out of the stairway. So if it's the same air pressure as the rest of the building, the smoke is going to go in there. You know, the stairway has always been the Alamo. You know, that's always been protected. And now with the single stairway, it's, like I said, you're putting all your eggs in one basket. You're gambling that it's going to work each and every time.
So the Home Fire Sprinkler Coalition has declared May 10th through the 16th as Home Fire Sprinkler Week. And as my 13 loyal listeners are aware that I am a big sprinkler advocate, well, let's talk about the issues with sprinklers and why they are important in buildings and important for the Wisconsin State Fire Inspectors Association to ensure that fire sprinklers remain in building plans and go into especially multifamily residential occupancies.
The list is long with the benefits of a sprinkler system. It's basically like having a firefighter on standby in your home 24 hours a day.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
What makes me mad, it's my own pet peeve that Hollywood in movies and TV shows show that a sprinkler system, if one head goes off, they all go off, which isn't true. Or if you pull the fire alarm pull station, then that activates the fire alarm or the sprinkler system as well, which is not correct. And I think that has been a really detriment or a big detriment to the promotion of sprinkler systems. Really, it only takes one head or maybe two to put the fire out. If it doesn't put it out completely, it'll control it. And insurance companies always used to have this attitude of, oh my gosh, you got sprinkler systems, what if a pipe breaks, all that water damage, oh my. Well, insurance companies that, at least in my experience that I've seen, insurance companies have learned over time, really, if they pay for a little bit of water damage, and I'm talking a little bit, where the fire department doesn't have to come in with their big hoses and put, you know, hundreds and hundreds of gallons of water on this fire, the sprinkler will put only a few gallons of water on it. Mm-hmm. And that is way cheaper to pay for that than it is for fire, heat, and smoke damage.
Yeah, exactly.
That causes way more damage than just that water.
Well, as Marty King always says, it's easier to dry out wet than unburned burned.
Oh,
so,
absolutely. Yeah. And, you know, there's been businesses that have had fires that have been controlled or put out with sprinkler systems, and they're in business the very next day.
Yep.
Or people have stayed in an apartment building where one apartment had a small fire and was controlled by a sprinkler system, and the people are still living there. If you have a fire inside of a residence that doesn't have sprinklers, now the smoke and the heat is very dangerous, and it causes a lot more damage.
I agree with you 100%, Jason. I just would like to add and reiterate, you know, for a home, it's very important to get residential sprinkler systems in new development, new homes. Remember, the primary role of the sprinkler system is to provide you a safe environment, hopefully to buy you time to exit from your home. Because of the different plastics, synthetics in your furnishings in your home, the fires burn hotter and faster, and they're smokier. This is why it's very important to allow you the extra time to exit your home. In the perfect world, the sprinkler system would control the fire, or in some instances put it out, but it would buy you time for you and your family to get out of your homes very safely.
You've got a network to rely on, but when it's time to dig, don't forget about your network below ground. Every yard hides underground water, gas, electric, and communication lines that keep you connected. One cut line and the network can go down, or worse. Diggers Hotline has helped protect Wisconsin for 50 years. Contact them 3 or more working days before you dig. Lines are marked for free, keeping your network safe. Be smart. Check before you start. Diggers Hotline.
So now talking about building safety, we're going to talk about fire inspections, since all of us have been fire inspectors at some points in our career. And the most important thing for after a building is built is to make sure that it's well maintained, whether it's the sprinkler systems, the fire alarm systems, the fire extinguishers, or any of the other building components that we could refer to building inspection. So let's talk about the importance of fire inspections in our relative districts or throughout the rest of the state or the rest of the country.
Fire inspections are super important. For me, up in the Stevens Point area, we do ours once. We have an ordinance to do our every business once a year. And, one of the biggest things I find, when we're going and looking at all the components you just talked about and then some, is education. I can't tell you how many times, and I'm sure it's, Dan and Jason, it's probably the same thing for you. You go into a business and, you'll see an extinguisher that hasn't been serviced in the last year, and you just kind of educate, that occupant, hey, this is, you need to do this. This is why it's important. Oh, I had no clue. And the same with, getting hood systems cleaned, all that kind of stuff. So I think just that educational piece is pretty top notch, because I find most people aren't out there to purposely violate fire code. They don't, wake up and I'm like, I'm going to violate fire code today just because I don't like it. And once in a great while, we'll find, some people will be like, oh, the fire department's here, they're going to cost me money, kind of thing. But I would say 99% of the time, people are pretty understandable, and they really appreciate us coming in and providing that safety, especially, I think, now with how our media is, you get highlighted more on incidents and stuff like that, and then you kind of find out the why certain incidents happen. So, and really nobody's immune from it. So I think just, learning that and relating it to your own business or your own community, I think is pretty important. So,
Yes, absolutely. Like you said, a lot of times when I go into a business, I look around, I can't help myself. I look up and I look around, and my wife is like, stop it, you're not working. But I just can't help myself. And like you said, it is education, because most people don't think like a fire inspector or like a firefighter. And if we find a fire code violation, it's more education than it is punitive. And then you explain why they have to do something, like extinguishers. Just as a quick example for extinguishers, if you don't maintain it, how do you know it's going to work? Same way with the sprinkler system. It takes some maintenance, and you got to, do some things, and, don't block exits, that kind of thing. And if you explain it to them in that term of safety, oh, I didn't know that. Oh, okay. And it's very rare. I mean, I don't know of anybody that absolutely does it on purpose. And it's very rare that somebody will just, not do something. And that's what I seem to run into in Eau Claire is it's all education. Just because they don't think like us, and then once they see the big picture, they look at a different perspective of it, oh, okay, I understand now.
I strongly agree, again, as always, with both of you. But one thing that I continually see, and I think is important with our inspections, is a building may be designed for a certain application, but then in a year or two you go into the building after time, and maybe a building purpose may change. Maybe technology changes within a building. Maybe they move offices around. Maybe one office had one person in it your previous inspection, and now you go in next time and there's maybe 5 or 6 people in this office. So the folks in the building may not be aware of the changes and how it could impact their safety, where that's the role and duty of us as fire inspectors, to come in and recognize maybe those changes and educate again as to why some code things may change, or they may have to do some additional things that they never thought about.
So then the last part would be public education, and Justin, you did bring that up as part of the fire inspection process, but there's so much more to public education, such as dealing with the media, making sure you've got the department's social media feeds, as well as your podcast. So the Stevens Point Fire Department has the Inside the Firehouse podcast with your partner in crime, Ben Schultz, who I used to work with. So let's talk about Pub Ed, and you can start off by talking about your podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for the little shout out there on the podcast. But one thing I think is really important when you talk about Pub Ed, period, I'll dive into this before I do the podcast, talking about the podcast, but I think it's important to understand your demographics for your area that you serve. So just understanding what that population is and how you can reach those different groups within the population. So for us in Stevens Point, we do the Inside the Firehouse podcast. We do an episode once a month. We drop it on the first Monday of every month, and it's a community based where we talk something safety related or an event coming up in the community. So it's pretty awesome there. So check it out. It's on Spotify, Inside the Firehouse. You can find it that way with Lieutenant Ben Schultz and myself as the hosts. But beyond that, social media is a great way to reach out to a lot of our community, which is pretty nice. And then we have news releases or media releases we can work with, doing articles as well with some of our media outlets. So I think it's important just to do all of those different avenues. I think is pretty key. Something we're going to be starting here in Stevens Point in June is we are bringing back a comic series. What we did is the Fire Marshal, Jared Hoffensberger, and myself being the Deputy Fire Marshal, we created a year's worth, I should say, of comics based off the NFPA safety sheets topics, and we're going to drop one every Sunday. So look forward to that coming out first Sunday in June, and then it'll go all year round. Just kind of bringing back, I don't know how many people remember the Sunday comics in the newspaper, but we're bringing that back. So we're hoping that'll be pretty successful to outreach that. But it's super important, that pub ed, and I think that's a great way to be proactive than reactive in the fire service.
Oh, absolutely. I wish there was a way that we could measure how many fires or injuries we have prevented. There really is no way of doing that. Like you said, the biggest thing we do is educate, not only while we are doing fire inspections, but everybody thinks of public education, the fire department is at the schools. Well, that's only one little piece of the pie. Yes, we do school education, but it's more than that. We do business education for adults and every level of the schools, or every grade, I should say. It's the blanket of community risk reduction for the senior population, risk of fall reductions, and just healthy preventative measures so you don't have to go to the hospital, you don't get sick, you don't get injured. The state has some wonderful resources on how to develop some prevention programs, find and just to identify problems in your response area. Mm-hmm. And then to do something to hopefully mitigate that.
And then, Jason, you can talk about one of your most recent ventures, because the Wisconsin State Fire Inspectors Association got the $750 stipend from the Home Fire Sprinkler Coalition, and you are working with iHeartMedia to be able to do a 1-minute PSA that will air on Eau Claire, Madison, and Milwaukee radio stations, the iHeartMedia stations. So why don't you talk about that process?
Absolutely. Yeah, that was, I certainly have a face for radio. At least that's what I'm told.
I would agree. I'm just kidding.
But I went in and it was great that we were able to get that grant. That was wonderful for education that way for home fire sprinklers. So I went into the studio and recorded a short PSA. That's going to go out, like you said, to those different markets, and hopefully that will generate some awareness for that so that we can increase the safety of homes as they're being built.
So, guys, this has been a really great discussion for Building Safety Month, as well as dealing with fire inspections and fire sprinklers and everything else we deal with. So do you have any final thoughts for our 13 loyal listeners?
One thing I kind of want to mention is, if you have any questions, whether you have a business and you're thinking about changing something within your business, or you want to start a business, or you have some home fire safety questions, reach out to us. Our services are free to ask questions for all of our municipalities. You can always call, reach out, email, and just ask a question. It doesn't hurt. I always hate coming in to do an inspection, I see something like, let's say somebody soundproofed a room and they didn't use the proper soundproofing that they should have, and then they have to redo it, kind of thing. A quick question beforehand: hey, I'm thinking about soundproofing this room. What are the requirements? What are the codes? Get that figured out. So one thing I'd like our the listeners to take away is just reach out, ask questions. Never hurts.
Yeah, absolutely. It's cheaper to do it right the first time than to figure it out later. I'm a huge proponent of working smoke detectors. I can't say this enough. We're on a record pace for home fire deaths. Check your smoke detectors. Make sure that they work. Change the batteries if you have to change the batteries.
Change out the smoke alarms after 10 years.
Yes, check the life of the smoke detector. they're only good for 10 years. So if it sits on the shelf at the store for a year, you only get 9 out of it. So I can't stress enough the importance of having working smoke detectors, because that's going to be your only notice of a fire. And like what Dan said earlier, fires nowadays, the way the construction methods are, the construction materials, they burn hotter and burn faster than ever before. And with all this man-made stuff, the polyurethane and all the manufactured materials, they burn hotter and faster. And in years past, you would have 3-4 minutes to get out. Well, now you have probably a minute or 2 at maximum to get out. A smoke detector will be your early alarm for that.
And again, I agree with Justin and Jason here wholeheartedly. I would just like to enforce with everyone that most likely when people see us walk up to them or come to their business, they're like, oh my goodness, this person's here to cost me money. Ultimately, what we're out there to do is save you money. Hopefully save a life, prevent a catastrophe or an injury event from occurring. One thing I like to just reinforce with folks is just remember, fire safety isn't expensive, it's priceless.
We would like to thank Jason Knecht, Justin Malin, and Dan Schmocker for the interview. For more information on Building Safety Month, you can visit iccsafe.org. Join us on our next episode when we talk about Emergency Medical Services Week. WPLG 715, Fireman Kenny is returning to quarters.
Hello, I'm Jason Knecht, Fire Inspector with the Eau Claire Fire Department and President of the Wisconsin Fire Inspectors Association. The Home Fire Sprinkler Coalition and iHeartMedia are working with first responders to help keep our communities safe. iHeartMedia and the Home Fire Sprinkler Coalition proudly salute our first responders. Residential home fires can become deadly in as little as 2 minutes. Homes burn faster today due to modern furnishings and lightweight wood construction. These fires produce smoke that is both toxic and deadly. A fire sprinkler system is the only thing that can stop a fire and deadly smoke from spreading. In less time than it takes firefighters to arrive at your burning home, fire sprinklers control the fire and allow everyone to escape. If you are building a brand new home, protect your family with home fire sprinklers. The Home Fire Sprinkler Coalition and iHeartMedia are proud to salute our first responders. For more information on Home Fire Sprinkler Week, visit homefiresprinkler.org.